Good afternoon. Welcome to the weekly edition of the Wrap. I'm Laura Leslie, WRAL Capitol Bureau Chief.
And I'm Bryan Anderson, WRAL State Government Reporter.
And we're watching the fallout from the elections this week, waiting to see who's going to be in control of the different chambers in Congress. It looks like the GOP is going to be in control of the House. And that means probably something of a promotion for longtime Congressman Patrick McHenry, I understand.
Yeah, he's likely to lead this new Financial Services Committee as Republicans appear to have regained control of the U.S. House, while Democrats appear to have held on to the U.S. Senate. McHenry is a longtime congressman from North Carolina here, and this is really one of the reddest, if not the reddest districts in the state. So McHenry clearly reelected, and he's going to have a very important role over in financial services now.
He sure is. And Richard Hudson also is going to be taking on a really important role. He's going to head up the NRCC.
Yeah, that's the group for folks who aren't familiar that is going to have an outsized role in really determining where money goes in 2024. So Hudson is going to shape which candidates get money. We saw Sandy Smith in North Carolina's first district not really get any outside spending from the NRCC or other conservative groups, and that played a role in her defeat. So obviously there's a very important role for Hudson in determining who can potentially be elected.
Absolutely. So anyway, we okay. In the meantime, here a little closer to home, looking at the election, we had some election worker intimidation and harassment that happened. I think there were like 6 or 7 instances of it that happened on election day, as we're just learning. One of them was in Wake County, where a car actually followed an election judge. The judge was transporting the tabulator machine, the ballots, the stick with the data, and followed that judge all the way to the County Board of Elections. Fortunately, the County Board of Elections was ready for it, and they had sheriff's deputies on scene, and they went over to talk to this driver who pulled over kind of in front of the Board of Elections, and as soon as the deputies started walking, this person took off. So no one was arrested. But in Rowan County, they had somebody, I guess, who grabbed a judge's arm and grabbed her phone and threw her phone and cussed her out. And it's just like, wow. I mean, talk about people behaving badly. I mean, I can't remember anything like that ever happening in Wake County.
And fortunately, few in quantity of cases relative to 2005, I think 2,600 plus precincts. But it's just the tenor has certainly changed since President Donald Trump, former president, denied the results of the 2020 election that he lost, and we're seeing fallout from it still. Heated rhetoric, heightened partisanship, and even some acts of intimidation that have really no place in. And these are election officials, just everyday people. These aren't career politicians in Washington, D.C. Not that it's ever acceptable to intimidate anyone, but these are ordinary folks trying to do their best to just administer a basic election.
Yeah.
And that's what we have to keep in mind. With these are ordinary people doing important work.
And that's very true. And as Karen Brinson Bell over the State Board of Elections pointed out, I mean, there's still very, very few incidents given how many votes were cast. The vast majority of voters did not run into an incident. However, as you were saying, these are normal people. They did not sign up for this, right? They did not sign up for combat pay, right? So it's not a good sign, and hopefully that dies down in the next election. Although a lot of election officials don't seem to be real hopeful that's going to happen. So also otherwise, we're looking at as we talked about, the red wave kind of didn't materialize in a lot of parts of the country, and according to polling experts, a lot of that was bad polls. Who basically jumped on the bandwagon at the last minute and made it look like the GOP was going to sweep, the House with, dozens of seats, when that's not how that worked out. But the GOP definitely, arguably, did better in North Carolina than they did in a lot of other states. I mean, if you think about it, Bryan, they swept all 6 of the judicial races and the Senate race. And you can't blame redistricting or gerrymandering for that. These are statewide races.
Yeah, I mean, statewide Republicans had a really solid night, and that doesn't come as a terrible surprise given the national dynamics of an off-year election, an unpopular President Joe Biden, an economy in worse shape than it was a year ago, and families still keeping that in the back of their mind. But, this wasn't an election year where Democrats were dominated as potentially expected. I was looking at 538's ratings and rankings, and they said there was a 59% chance Republicans would get control of the U.S. Senate. That didn't happen. And there was an 80% chance Republicans would get control of the U.S. House. That appears to have happened, but certainly not by any commanding margins. It's right now, as we're recording this, it's something like 218 Republicans, 210 Democrats, and 7 uncalled races. So, I mean, you're talking about an incredibly razor thin majority. And North Carolina didn't help Republicans at the congressional level. We saw a 7-7 split, and that was arguably the worst plausible case for Republicans. And it really just came down to a coin toss race that Wiley Nickel won against Bo Hines in North Carolina's 13th district, and a lean Democratic seat in the 1st district that Don Davis won, but didn't win by the comfortable margins Democrats had hoped for.
Sure. So so looking at all that, in the meantime, I mean, the dust had not even settled on this election when former President Donald Trump announced that he is going to be, that was Monday night, I believe, or Tuesday night, that he's going to be running for re-election. So, of course, we wanted to know what our elected officials thought about it. And over the course of the week, we were able to ask House Speaker Tim Moore, Senate Leader Phil Berger, and also Senator Thom Tillis yesterday. I was talking to him about this. Generally, not a lot of excitement about the Trump reentry here. There's a lot of wait and see, a lot of gee, it's too soon, a lot of let's get Georgia settled first. I mean, you have to admit, I mean, Trump was pretty good for North Carolina Republicans. I mean, they picked up seats when he was on the ballot. He won the state twice. So it's interesting to me that there's not at least a little bit more, let's call it lip service, if not genuine excitement, to hear that he's back on the ballot.
I mean, here's the problem for Republicans. You have Donald Trump who won the state in 2016 and 2020. That's true, but I mean, the candidates he's backed in 2022 performed, frankly, really terribly. You look at Madison Cawthorn in the primary, losing to Chuck Edwards. Now, I know Trump wasn't full-throated endorsement level excited about Cawthorn, but I mean, he did back Cawthorn and put his reputation out days before the primary to back Cawthorn. Cawthorn lost that race. You also look at some of the most Trumpy candidates in North Carolina. Bo Hines, a Republican political newcomer, lost a winnable race. Sandy Smith, a hardline conservative, to put it mildly,
Right.
lost. And that was despite having 4.7 million in ads against her. And you look at Don Davis, who had like $28,000 against him, like 2,000x multiple difference. So this is sort of the problem with getting too close to Trump. Now, someone can say, look, it worked out well for Ted Budd, but he also had substantial outside money coming in from Club for Growth in the primary that may have in some ways been more influential than the Trump endorsement. So it's just a different dynamic in 2022 than I think we saw in 2016 or 2020.
Right. One person that was excited, one sitting congressman, you mentioned Madison Cawthorn, was at Mar-a-Lago for the announcement. Said that he would die for Donald Trump, follow him till he died, I think he said. And so in the meantime, he seems to have closed up shop pretty much in his district, and he doesn't seem to be showing up at Capitol Hill anymore. But we are told that he bought $1 million plus house down in Lee County, Fort Myers, in Florida. Which is where my folks lived for a long time, which is why I know that. This is all kind of strange to me that, I mean, I guess when you lose your primary, then, it's hard to get excited about doing the job, but it's also hard to make the case if you ever want to run again, if you sort of bailed on it before you were done.
Yeah, I mean, he was not a constituent-oriented candidate, to put it to put it politely. I mean, we saw Chuck Edwards put out a tweet that said his Raleigh office stands ready to help those who cannot get a returned call, sort of a hinted criticism of Cawthorn, but basically saying, hey, Western North Carolinians, if you have a constituent services issue and you can't get through, I'm going to be your next congressman, and I'm going to focus my attention on serving your needs. So, I mean, certainly unusual to see something like that.
Right. And then a little more from the election fallout, NC Values Coalition. So they were going around doing basically boot camps for school board candidates. I think it's a program. If I'm thinking of the right one, it's called BEST Best, but it might be a different. There are various groups that are doing this, but the Values Coalition said that they had some success around the state, and so for the first time they're going to start reaching into other counties starting in 2023, and they're talking about target counties now. So we heard about this on Twitter. Very interesting. NC Values Coalition was behind the same-sex marriage amendment. They were behind HB2. They're behind a lot of things that have not consistently worked out well for North Carolina. And you can expect them to be very active next year, however, in the abortion debate. What are legislators going to do in terms of further limiting abortion? So clearly very much still in the game, still an important player, despite HB2 and some other hits.
Yeah, and this is worth noting. This is a Republican controlled legislature coming into power that will be emboldened to take some more, maybe a return to more social issues than we had seen over the past 2 years. I mean, they're one House Democrat away, or just absent Democrats away, from overriding a veto from Democratic Governor Roy Cooper. So, I mean, we could see some of the most ambitious, consequential, potentially harmful pieces of legislation coming out of the legislature in 2023 and 2024, and abortion certainly one of those top of mind issues.
I think I will be surprised if we see things coming out that are more sort of socially conservative than we saw during the McCrory administration, simply because the state was a little redder then, I think, and they had a Republican governor who still didn't sign off on everything, but nonetheless they had solid supermajorities and a Republican governor. The state is getting bluer, and I think they know that. And so because more and more people are moving in here, although it does tend to be limited to urban areas. So I don't know how much that changes their the calculus for them. But it seems to me like we may not see as extreme legislation coming out as we would have, say, 10 years ago, just because of the changes we've seen in the state.
I mean, total Republican control would be hard to top. But given what we've seen over the last 2 years,
Yeah.
you've seen an impossible. I think you've seen bills maybe come out knowing that they wouldn't end up happening,
Right.
and maybe that's why they've advanced. So I'll be curious to see if they continue that, or if they sort of just stay more business growth oriented in the legislature, and limited in their focus. But the biggest pieces to watch for are going to certainly be abortion, maybe immigration, and definitely redistricting.
And winning this, as Moore puts it, governing supermajority in the House makes it a little bit harder for House and Senate leaders to kind of tamp down the folks at the farthest edges of their party, right? Because they no longer have the opportunity to just say, look, that's going to get vetoed. We're not going to take that up.
Yeah, I'm curious what this means, especially on the House side, for Medicaid expansion and the future of that. I mean, we had it seemed sort of flip-flopped between where the House and Senate were on the issue of Medicaid, and now the Senate's more embracing of a more sweeping policy, and the House wants more limited, a limited bill, and there was some talk of compromise. But I'm curious what compromise might look like for a House that's as staunchly conservative as it's going to be.
And that doesn't really have to compromise much.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. To move on, there's lots of other stuff. Senators, speaking of the NC Values Coalition, they came out this just yesterday, actually, against Tuesday. Well, no, sorry, I think it was yesterday, against Senator Thom Tillis and Senator Richard Burr. Both of them, Burr and Tillis, are in favor of a bill. They voted for cloture on a bill that's in the U.S. Senate right now that would basically codify same-sex marriage and interracial marriage into federal law. as a way to sort of be a backstop against any possible future Supreme Court decision that might overturn it. You might remember that Clarence Thomas's concurring opinion in the Dobbs decision specifically mentioned marriage as same-sex marriage as something else that they should consider reviewing again. So this is kind of in response to that. Thom Tillis actually is playing kind of a key role because he's one of a group of negotiators that have sort of, this bill was probably just going to die, because it couldn't get the votes from the Republicans. But Tillis started working with Kirsten Sinema and some other folks and came up with some religious freedom language, basically saying, this doesn't limit any of your First Amendment freedoms, your religious expression freedoms, to add to this bill to make sure that maybe it could pick up some Republican votes. And it did. It picked up 12 Republican votes on cloture. Now they're waiting until after the Thanksgiving holiday to take the actual vote. And I know that social conservative groups are pushing really hard on those senators to get them to change their vote. So it'll be interesting to see whether or not it has that much GOP support when it goes up for its actual vote after Thanksgiving. But then after that, it still has to go back to the House. And honestly, its fate there, if they even get to it before the end of the year, its fate there seems questionable.
Yeah, I mean, it is worth noting just how much has changed over the past decade, especially with Thom Tillis. It's almost a complete 180 from how he was when he was in the legislature, and it's
right. I mean,
certainly something that has so much momentum that the overwhelming majority of the public supports, and we'll just have to see if it's another thing that gets on the chopping block in Congress, or if federal lawmakers can actually reflect the will of the public.
Well, I mean, think about it. I mean, Tillis was Speaker of the NC House in 2012, and that's when they advanced that the same-sex marriage ban as a constitutional amendment and put it on the ballot, right? And we were the last state to pass that. Other states were literally repealing their bans the same year we were putting ours into the Constitution. And Tillis was Speaker, so Tillis could have stopped it if he wanted to, but he didn't. But he said at the time he thought it would probably not last for more than a generation or two. Well, 10 years, I guess, is a little bit less than a generation or two. But, as you point out, things have changed rapidly, culturally speaking. And, Tillis basically said he got involved because he saw an opportunity to defend religious freedom, and why not give all these families certainty to know that their marriages aren't going to be suddenly undone by a court opinion that nobody was expecting.
Exactly.
I wanted to add one more thing, and that is Roy Cooper speaking at a gun conference yesterday. And this is a group called 97%. It's sort of billed as a bipartisan group that includes a lot of gun owners trying to come up with common sense gun control legislation. I was interested to see him as the national headliner for that, because it does kind of make you wonder what he's going to get up to after 2024. He's termed out, right?
Yeah, I mean, people have chatted about him potentially being a presidential candidate in 2024. His name has come up. Cooper has not really been vocal about embracing that, really, but he also necessarily hasn't distanced and ruled it out. I mean, it seems everyone's just waiting on something formal from Biden to plot the next move for the Democratic Party. But Cooper is someone who could very well have a future in federal office potentially. I mean, he will be termed out. He's still very popular. He won in a state that Trump won in 2016 and in 2020, and he remains popular widely among Democrats and even has some crossover appeal with moderate Republicans.
Yes.
So if anything, that's certainly valuable traits for a vice president. We'll have to see if he actually wants to become a president.
I'm just thinking here, but it's very interesting to me that on the Republican side, you're hearing people saying, okay, well, Trump is in, former President Trump is in, but we're going to wait and see who else gets on the ticket before we make up our minds, right? On the Democratic side, you're hearing a lot of, well, we're going to wait and see. They're basically deferring to Biden. And I understand he is the current president, but nonetheless, it seems a little lopsided, I guess. That you're not hearing some Democrats making noise about getting into the race. You're not hearing a lot of Republicans making, saying that they should defer.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen winks and nods from Mike Pence about running. Ron DeSantis, when he won his re-election bid, folks in the audience were chanting 2 more years, sort of encouraging him to run for president. So we're not seeing that level of heightened activity on the Democratic side,
No,
certainly.
not yet, but give it time, right? Give it time. Anyway,
Absolutely.
I think, is there anything else that I missed that you wanted to mention?
Just two quick things, really quick. We have a good story on candidate quality and the impact that may have had in Congress in North Carolina, particularly with Sandy Smith and to some extent concerns about Bo Hines. I invite people to check that out at WRAL.com and just search NC Capitol there. I also have a quirky news item with these Federal Election Commission reports I just wanted to share. So basically, what happens is you, on a quarterly basis or on a less than quarterly basis as an election nears, these campaigns release these reports showing their donations, contributions received. And so what's supposed to happen is individual donors are not allowed to contribute more than $2,900 per election. So if you contribute $3,000, then the campaign is obligated to give you a $100 refund just to make sure that your maxed out stays maxed out and you're not going over that. But there were some interesting findings in reports from Ted Budd and Sherry Beasley. Collectively, they had received, I think, about 71,000 in questionable money, basically meaning from people donating too excessively or from people who are with unregistered political organizations.
Right, political
But there were
organizations who don't follow federal rules in terms of keeping their money sequestered.
exactly, and
Yeah.
there were two interesting items to me in the Budd report. One person donated $7,100 in a single transaction, which is a pretty apparent and clear red flag. I
How
asked
do
the
you, how do you miss that, right?
Yeah, I mean, I asked Bud's campaign what was up with that, and they've sort of said, yeah, we've refunded all these people. It's just uh, it there's some processing gaps between when we report and when the FEC can acknowledge that, and basically saying, at the time we provided the report, we were still trying to figure out what was up with that one individual and how to refund that properly. And the other case was this woman who appeared to be some California realtor or former real estate person in California, who, by our count, Laura, had 181 individual contributions in the course of 77 days.
Yeah.
And that person is currently owed back about $25 or $26, something small.
Yeah,
But
because
it was
most of these were small donations that they made through WinRed. So there's WinRed and Act Blue. They're kind of like the two fundraising platforms that Republicans and Democrats use. And so apparently this one was just kind of like leaning on the WinRed, giving to WinRed. And this is what, some of it went to Bud and holy smokes. I don't, even small dollar, I don't know what it's like to have the kind of money to make like 14 donations in a day.
It's
But
like 50, it ranges from 50 cents to $95 for perspective. There were donations of pennies, basically.
yeah, I don't know. People, man. Anyway. All right. Well, I think that is just about it for us. Some great things to point out. I want to note the Assembly had a great story on Mark Robinson and his use of scripture. Really interesting stuff. And that's pretty much it. There's great stuff on NC Capitol. If you haven't checked in this week, you should definitely do that. And we'll catch up with you next week. Thanks for joining us.